Peruvian social organizations resumed massive protests to demand the resignation of President Dina Boluarte, the holding of early elections, and the release of former President Pedro Castillo. In Santa Cruz de la Sierra, political violence by Luis Fernando Camacho's followers persists while most of the country is in calm. In Palestine, Israel's army demolished 5 homes, water tanks, and olive orchards in 2 villages in the southern West Bank. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. On Wednesday, Peruvian social organizations resumed massive protests to demand the resignation of President Dina Boluarte, the holding of early general elections, and the release of former President Pedro Castillo. Citizens will carry out peaceful marches to call for an indefinite strike in the departments of Arequipa, Ayacucho, Apurímac, Cusco, Moquegua, Madre de Dios, and Puno. The General Confederation of Workers of Peru called for a march in Lima in solidarity with the mobilizations and protests that citizens of the provinces have undertaken. It also supported demands related to the anticipation of general elections, the resignation of Boluarte, and the closure of Congress. Since December 7th, Peru has been mired in a deep political crisis due to the removal of Pedro Castillo and his subsequent imprisonment. During the protests against Dina Boluarte administration, 22 people have died due to violent police repression. The head of Peru's National Intelligence Directorate, Juan Carlos Liendo O'Connor, presented his resignation in a letter sent to President Dina Boluarte, stating his decision was determined by serious issues that prevented him from properly fulfilling his role. In the framework of the political situation in Peru, the O'Connor had said on December 18th that in every place where the police and law enforcement are attacked, there is a political target, and that is called terrorist insurgency. The statement was then disavowed by Boluarte, who publicly showed her disagreement with these declarations. The Peruvian head of state has already begun actions to substitute him amid massive protests that question the legitimacy of her government. On Tuesday in Bolivia, official institutions filed an appeal requesting the extension of the pre-trial detention of Luis Fernando Camacho, far-right governor of Santa Cruz, from 4 to 6 months in prison. The Minister of Justice of Bolivia, Ivan Lima, confirmed that the presentation of the appeal is also informed that the accused in the case of the 2019 coup d'etat presented an appeal to lift the precautionary measures against him. It is expected that in the next hours the Departmental Court of Justice of La Paz will draw lots for the chambers where the appeals requested will be analyzed. After being apprehended last December 28th, Camacho was transferred to the prison of Chonchocoro to serve 4 months of preventive detention due to the accusation of links with the violent events that occurred in 2019. In Santa Cruz de la Sierra, Bolivia, political violence by Luis Fernando Camacho's followers persists while most of the country is in calm. Local media have highlighted the willingness of both private and state companies to remain in operation despite demonstrations of groups demanding the governor's release. The authorities underline the peaceful vocation of the majority of the population, which did not join the call of the extremist sectors. The Bolivian government reported that from January to November 2022, the country registered a trade surplus of $761 million. President Luis Arce said that in spite of international conflicts, the country's export volume rose 42% and product exports increased 53% compared to 2021. The president detailed that the figures represent a record of $12,617 million, leaving a trade surplus of $761 million. The Bolivian Institute of Foreign Trade reported that the highest revenue comes from non-traditional exported products such as beef, sunflowers, soybeans, and their derivatives, among others. On Wednesday, residents of Mexicaltenango, a town located north of Mexico City, protested a fire at a spring in the municipality of Jilotepecse. The population had been complaining for weeks about a persistent smell of gasoline when a water well in the community caught fire and began to spit thick black smoke. The state company Petróleos Mexicanos has not commented on the situation, but there is suspicion that gasoline might have leaked into the local aquifers. The municipal president of Jilotepec, Rodolfo Nogues, said on Monday night that Pemex authorities had agreed to visit the spring to investigate the fire. In 1993, a series of sewer explosions affected a 50-block area in Guadalajara, killing at least 220 people. Investigators later determined the explosion had been caused by gasoline that had escaped from a subway pipe into the sewer system. On Wednesday, Colombia's National Liberation Army, or ELN by Spanish acronym, issued a statement saying no ceasefire agreement has yet been reached with the administration of Gustavo Petro. Although on December 31st, President Petro announced on his Twitter account a decree regarding a bilateral ceasefire agreement with the ELN, now his administration is calling it off. Colombia's Interior Minister Alfonso Prada said in a press conference that the government has decided to call off the decree until the negotiating table resumes in the coming days. Still, the Interior Minister insisted on the need for a truce to curtail violence in the territories affected by the conflict. Let us take a short break, but first remember you can follow us on TikTok at the account at teleSUR English, in which you'll be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back from the South. On Wednesday, Argentina marks the one-year anniversary of the Caso, an environmental mobilization that tried to make the serious consequence of the seismic exploration visible. Protest activities will take place in different cities of the country while the Argentinian government advances in the authorization of seismic exploration by foreign companies. Demonstration aimed to show the popular rejection of a recent decision made by the Federal Court of Appeals of Mar del Plata to annul a precautionary measure preventing offshore exploration. The court considered that both the Argentinian government and the Norwegian company Equinor, one of the exploiting companies, had complied with the requested requirements to carry out the activity. The former U.S. intelligence analyst Ana Belén Montes, who used her position to ease the blockade and Washington's attacks against Cuba, will be released from U.S. prison after more than 2 decades. Belén Montes is said to be released from a federal prison in Texas on January 8th, according to the U.S. Bureau of Prisoners. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison on October 16, 2002, for espionage on behalf of the Cuban state. Montes pleaded guilty to the charges against her and told the court that she obeyed her conscience rather than the law, as she considered her government's policy towards Cuba cruel, unjust, and deeply unsupportive. Belén Montes was one of the main analysts on Cuba who worked for the Pentagon and was arrested on September 21, 2001. According to Washington, her detention was motivated by fear that she might leak information about the invasion of Afghanistan the United States was planning to carry out the following month. On Wednesday, FIFA announced that the field at the Zurich headquarters stadium will be renamed Pelé in honor of the legendary Brazilian player who died last December 29th. While attending Pelé's funeral at the Santos Vila Belmiro Stadium in Brazil, the president of FIFA, Gianni Infantino, suggested that 211 associations that are part of the organization must rename at least one stadium in each of their countries after the former player who won the World Cup 3 times with Brazil. He also announced that the stadium of the headquarters in Zurich will be renamed Pelé Stadium as an example to be followed around the world and a tribute from the football community to the Brazilian legend. In Italy, gasoline and diesel prices skyrocketed after the expiration of a fuel excise tax rebate implemented in March 2022 that helped to help combat the rising fuel prices. According to data from the Italian Ministry of Environment and Energy Security, national average prices during the last week of the year were 1.64 euros per liter of gasoline and 1.71 euros per liter of diesel at self-service pumps. At the expiration of the tax rebate, gasoline went up to 1.80 euros and diesel rose to 1.87 euros, both increasing over 9% in the span of a few days. In the first days of 2023, gasoline prices stood at 1.95 euros per liter, while diesel surpassed the 2 euros per liter mark. The discount initially expired on December 1st and was extended at a lower rate until the end of 2022, when expiring entirely. The United Kingdom will return to Greece some pieces of the Elgin marbles from the Parthenon in Athens as part of a cultural exchange after the British Museum and the Acropolis Museum in Athens closed the restitution deal. According to the Parthenon Project, a body chaired by Ed Vacy, a former British culture minister, the term cultural exchange would circumvent a British law that prevents the London institution from dismantling its impressive collection. At the same time, the British Museum would continue to display magnificent pieces of Greek art as a museum of the world. In recent decades, Greek governments have intensified their demands for London to return the pieces. British authorities claim that the sculptures were legally acquired in 1802 by British diplomat Lord Elgin, who sold them to the British Museum, but Greece claims they were looted while the country was under Ottoman occupation. Philippines Interior Secretary announced on Wednesday he asked all police generals and full colonels to submit their courtesy resignation to clean ranks of ties to illegal drugs. Interior Secretary Benjamin Avalos Jr. said in a news conference that the directive reaches around 300 officers and was recommended by the National Police Chief, who will also submit his courtesy resignation. More than a dozen police officers were arrested or relieved from their posts and put under investigation last year for their involvement or suspected involvement in drug trade. The country's drug enforcement agency was also subject to raids, arrests, and dismissals in recent months. Human rights groups have cited higher death tolls and accused some police officers of fabricating evidence to make it appear that victims violently resisted arrest. More news coming up after a final short break, so don't go away. Welcome back from the South. On Wednesday, China said it hoped countries would focus on fighting COVID-19 itself, avoiding politicization, after the United States once again called for transparency from Beijing on virus infection data as the country sees a widespread surge in cases.
We also know that many people said that if the U.S. hadn't politicized the pandemic at the very onset but responded responsibly with an attitude of putting life first like what the Chinese government did, I'm afraid that the COVID-19 situation both within the U.S. and worldwide wouldn't have developed as it has today. We sincerely hope that all parties will focus on fighting COVID-19 itself, avoid politicization on the virus issue, strengthen solidarity, and work together to prevail over COVID-19 as soon as possible.
Likewise, foreign ministry spokesperson Mao Ning commented on the newly released assessment made by the International Atomic Energy Agency on Japan's plan to discharge nuclear-contaminated water into the sea and said Japan's unilateral push for the program was reckless and irresponsible.
The discharge of nuclear-contaminated water isn't a private matter for Japan. We once again urge Japan to pay attention to the legitimate and reasonable demands of the international community, fully consult with its neighboring countries, Pacific Island countries, and other stakeholders and relevant international agencies, and effectively dispose of the water in an open, transparent, scientific, and safe manner, and accept the strict supervision of the International Atomic Energy Agency.
On Wednesday, Myanmar began a mass release of prisoners, including some political detainees, to mark the 75th anniversary of independence from Britain. The military government said it was pardoning 7,012 prisoners, along with a partial commutation of the sentences of other inmates not convicted of serious crimes. However, the gesture will not include ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi. 77-year-old Suu Kyi is serving 33 years in prison after being convicted for a series of politically tinged prosecutions brought by the military. These include illegally importing and possessing walkie-talkies, violating coronavirus restrictions, breaching the country's Official Secrets Act, sedition, election fraud, and corruption charges. More than 13,000 prisoners of the 17,000 that have been detained in the last 2 years remain behind bars. On Monday, the Humanity Center for Rights and Development released a report stating that during last year's war in Yemen, the total number of casualties surpassed the 3,000. The published number includes the death of 643 citizens and 2,440 wounded. The report also adds that Saudi-led coalition airstrikes on Yemen killed 102 children during 2022. As for the damage to Yemen's infrastructure, the report mentions the attack have destroyed over 14,000 homes, 134 mosques, 64 educational centers, and 12 hospitals, among other vital areas. The aggression also destroyed 22 power stations, 46 communication towers and stations, and 974 roads and bridges. In Palestine, Israel's army demolished 5 homes, water tanks, and olive orchards in 2 villages in the southern West Bank, where residents are at risk of imminent expulsion. According to images shared by local residents and activists, the military heavy machinery moved through the West Bank with bulldozers razing homes, animal pens, and cisterns, while dumping people's property over the cold desert. Both villages, Tel Marin and Chab al-Bultum, are within Area C and under full Israeli military control. Most residents of the area known as Masafer Yatta have remained in place since the ruling, even as Israel's security forces periodically roll in to demolish structures. However, they could be forced out at any time. Schools remain closed in Tehran and several other cities on Wednesday as severe air pollution continued to hit Iran. Thick smoke has blanketed the capital for more than a week, prompting authorities to urge residents to stay home. The air pollution index stood at 162 on Wednesday, about 3 times higher than the healthy standards. Critics have blamed the government for burning mazout, a low-quality fuel oil used in power plants instead of natural gas. Tehran's air is among the most polluted in the world, and school closures because of poor air quality are a regular occurrence. The smoke is mostly caused by heavy traffic as well as factory pollution and typically worsens during the cold season. We have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For teleSUR English, I'm Luis Fernando Camacho. Thank you for watching.